Hey, it's great to be back in Nebraska. I was here in 2005 and 2006 for the very first time that this conference was put on. I got a call from the National Park Service, and they said, Bob, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm working. And they said, well, we think there's a problem in Omaha. It doesn't seem to be a lot of preservation ethic, and we want to help them create an event, and we're going to call it Restore Omaha. And I'm like, far out, I am there. And so I ended up coming 2 times. My friend John Leake was here. How many people remember John Leake when he was here? John is my favorite nerd in the whole world. Thank God for John. He does such great research. We were really sorry we couldn't get him to be here this time, but I will say hello for him on his behalf. I said in a couple of breakout sessions, I asked a question. So if you were in those breakout sessions, you have to bear with me just a little bit. How many people in this audience, now you have to be really honest, no messing around. How many people in this audience would say that you are at a minimum preservation friendly or full-on preservationist? Raise your hand. All right. Now you got to make sure on the back table when you leave to get the pamphlet, it's a 12-step program to get over it, all right? Because everyone knows that preservation is a left-wing conspiracy to take away your property rights. Everyone knows that the paint police are going to come and tell you what color to paint your house, or the preservation police are going to come in and tell you what you can and can't do with the tile in your bathroom. And of course, none of this is true. Historic preservation doesn't take away property rights. It creates property rights. How is that possible? Because how many of you have heard that I don't want a preservation ordinance, I don't want anybody telling me what I can do and can't do with my own house? How many people have heard that before? Right. So we should get rid of zoning. We should get rid of building codes. We should get rid of fire departments. We should get rid of police departments. We should get rid of all these government programs where we're telling people what to do, or maybe we shouldn't. It's something to think about. So historic preservation, most people that live in historic properties live in the core of their community. Sometimes in larger communities we call it the central city. They used to call it the inner city, but that's a very negative term, so I call it the central city historic neighborhoods. How many people live in a central city historic neighborhood? All right. You're second-class citizens, don't ever forget it, all right? Because we know when I get hired to go into angry crowds of people who want to not be in a local historic district, because you can be in a national district and there's no controls. Unless you take a historic tax credit or some sort of grant from a government agency within the state or the feds, then you can do anything you want with a historic property. You don't have to do anything. There's nobody there to tell you. The only time that we get to a point where we're encouraging you to keep the character-defining features on the outside of your house only is when you're in a local historic district or you're an individual local landmark. That's it. Now, I think it's important to understand that when we look at that angry crowd of property rights people that want to decertify that local district because they don't want to be told what to do, they always hire an attorney. Now, I get hired to come in and chat with these folks and convince them that they shouldn't do this. First thing I do is I find out who that attorney is. Then I find out where they live, and guess what? They all live in cornfield developments with snout houses. Snout house is a house where the most redeeming architectural feature is a 3-car garage and vinyl siding, right? And they all live in these neighborhoods, and guess what? All these neighborhoods have covenants. What you can do, fence heights, types of fences, can't have your RV, house colors, 4 different types of vinyl siding that are approved, or what have you, right? So I get that covenant, and I put it up on the screen, and I put the design guidelines that these people are upset about up next to it. And they are shocked. The covenants are far more restrictive than any design guidelines. And what's interesting is that people that are looking at being CLG, certified local governments, there were a bunch of people that we had talks with yesterday morning that some in the community are a little dubious about this because, you know, the paint police are going to come in and tell us what to do, right? Well, the truth is that being a CLG, a certified local government, is based upon you having a basic ordinance and that follows the 10-point guidelines. The title of it is just like is the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. That's what that is. It's not a Bible. It's a guideline that we follow in the state preservation offices, in the city staff places, and places like that. So you have an ordinance that basically follows that. But the design guidelines, if you decide to have design guidelines that are going to oversee a potential local district or your individual landmarks, the community gets together and decides what they want in those guidelines. There's certain parameters, but there's some leeway. And so you can have design guidelines in your community. That is what gives you property rights. If you don't have design guidelines in a central city neighborhood, you have zero property rights. And if you don't have rental inspections, you have no property rights. How many people have rental inspections in their community in Nebraska? Zero. Why? We license barber shops, beauty shops, dog groomers, and we're not going to license the people where you raise your children for just basic health and safety? That's why slumlords, yes, I use that term, decimate our central city neighborhoods. They take those properties, they don't put anything back in them, and they walk away from them, or they sell them to unsuspecting people down the road. So these are things that happen that we need to think about. You need to have some property rights. I live in a really great house. I live in an 8,000 square foot, 5-story, 1859 Italianate. I only live in a small part of it because the rest of it is our school and our bed and breakfast. And I have to sit on my porch and I have to look at this thing down on the corner on the block. It was a beautiful Italianate with mansard roofs and towers, and two brothers built catty corner from each other. One is still there and the other one is a white generic box with aluminum siding on it. All the towers are gone. And when that happened, it lowers my property values. When you see vinyl siding going on in a neighborhood, that's the sign the neighborhood is in decline. Every time we see waves of replacement siding, it started with asbestos, slate. And then we saw insul brick, that's my favorite, tar paper brick. Boy, you knew if that was going on, you were having a really great time in your neighborhood, huh? So the bottom line is that often when people say that I don't want, it's my property, I want you to remember what my father told me when I was 5 years old. Now, my father was head of the Republican Party in Iowa. He was a corporate guy. He worked for Chevron. He was a very fiscally conservative guy, but a little bit of a social liberal, a little bit, but not much, but just a little bit. And my mother was a feminist writer for the New York Times. So dinner was always interesting. When I was a kid, my dad would take me out to the airport, we'd pick up Barry Goldwater and bring him home for dinner. And my mother would go pick up Bella Abzug and bring her home for dinner. Now, younger people may not know who Bella Abzug was, but she was one of the leaders of the women's movement back in the 60s and 70s, and she's passed away now, but she was fascinating. So dinner was always interesting at my house. And my father was traveling all over the world for Chevron, but he would come home and he was a weekend old house warrior. And I would do anything to hang out with him. And he was down in his woodworking shop, and he nonchalantly says to me, "You know, Bob, we don't own this house." And I'm like, I start crying. "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we don't own this house." "You like this house?" "Yeah, Dad, I love this house. It's beautiful. There's all kinds of nooks and crannies to play in, and there's beam ceilings that Mom likes, and French doors and Dutch doors and balconies and clay tile on the roof, and it's a beautiful old house, Dad." He said, "Well, we don't own it." And I'm like, "Well, okay, so we're moving, right?" He says, "No, we're not moving. You can go down to the county and they'll tell you we own this house. But don't you ever ever think for 1 minute that you own a house. You buy a house, you are the steward of that house, and it's your job, our job, to do good work that lasts so the next family can enjoy it as much as we have. That stuck with me like glue. I am standing here today because my father was so far ahead of his time in regard to this, that he understood that a throwaway society would hurt us in the long run. So we often hear that historic preservation is a really expensive thing. It's what we do when times are good. It's a foo-foo thing that blue-haired old ladies do and all this kind of thing. And nothing could be further from the truth. Remember back in 2008 when we had the crash. In Europe, they pumped more money into the artisan trades. Here, we pulled back. We didn't have anything. We got rid of grants. The Obama administration had tax credits for vinyl windows. They had tax credits for cheesy lumberyard aluminum storms, but they wouldn't, we took all the data to them, they wouldn't give tax credits for restoring and weather stripping an existing window or putting on a wood storm. They just wouldn't do it. So we just didn't approach it in the proper way in my mind, because we're losing these trades. These houses, even though we see things, old buildings and houses being torn down, we're going to have all these buildings that are 50 years and older for a long time, and we need people to do the work. Now, I've been a historic property developer for 45 years. I just finished my 163rd historic property that I've been involved in the restoration of. And that's everything from being direct owner to being a partner to being a primary consultant and project manager of all these properties over the years. I would go in and buy an entire block, both sides of the streets, of abandoned houses that the city wanted every one of them torn down. And I would buy them, and I would take the worst, most visible house, and I would restore that house. And when I first went to a banker and I said, you know, this is my plan. We'll do the first one to show people what the possibilities are, create a buzz, work with the neighborhood association, get them all tuned up, and we'll start to create that little snowball effect, and then we'll rehab the houses in between the corner houses as we go along. And I won't make a profit until the back end. And all these bankers were like freaking out. What do you mean you won't make a profit every single one of them? And I'm like, it's a process. It's called giving back to the community, and I'm in it to make money. I'm a capitalist. I believe in free markets. That's not an issue. What is an issue is that if we're going to bring neighborhoods back, we need to approach them in systematic ways. And that has been my model over the years. Now, I've done everything from high schools turned into loft condominiums to primarily single-family homes, all slumlord decimated, all chopped up into apartments, and generally taken back to single-family homes. Now, a friend of mine named Donovan Ripkema is a real estate economist, and he's internationally known. All of Europe, even China, they hire Don to come in and evaluate the realities on the ground about a variety of different things. He's not a preservationist. He is a Republican, and he believes in preservation because the data shows that preservation doesn't cost, it pays. And I'm going to walk you through some of that here in a minute. One of the things that he asked me to do, he said, look, you've been doing this so long, do you have good data on all the projects you've done? Well, I have, like 20 boxes of notebooks with sketches of every project that I've done over the years, and I have all the accounting information. He said, I want you to find out two things for me. Go back and look at, take the first 160 of these houses and buildings you've done and calculate two things for me. One is, what is the average square foot price, including acquisition of the property? In other words, how much did that project cost, including buying the property, rehabbing it, before you sold it? Because I don't hold properties. I try not to. If I'm doing a tax credit, I have to hold it for a while, but I don't like being a landlord. So I buy, restore, or rehab, preservation-oriented rehab is what I call it, and then I sell them. So I said, that's a lot of work, Don. And I'm not getting paid to do it. He says, I know, but you love giving things away. So And my wife would tell you that too. That's why I sleep with one eye open. But anyway, so I did this. My average cost per square foot to completely rehab, that's all new systems, doing a museum quality exterior, respecting the architecture inside but putting in second floor laundries, and my wife is Imelda Marco, so I had to have a whole closet for all of her shoes and all of her dresses and all that stuff. And doing everything that I need to do to the house, I have never been over $98 a square foot. Never been over $98 a square foot. And often I'm $70 to $80 a square foot. That's astonishing. Now, I buy abandoned properties very cheap that no one thinks can be rehabbed. So I'm not going in and buying something that's really in decent shape and just needs a little fixing up. That's not what I do. I get them really cheap, and then I'm able to put money into them. And I'm on the job site every day swinging a hammer. I run a full-time apprentice. I have crews of small subcontractors that I've mentored and taught how to do this stuff that are very loyal to me in the communities I'm working in. And we just attack it, and we go. The average length of a single-family home in the rehab is 9 months, and it's ready to sell. The house that I'm in right now, I started in 2008, and I finished in 2015. So it's my house, right? And I wanted everything to be perfect, so I just took more time. Plus, I'm on the road half the year. Part of what I do, and part of the reason I do what I do with both the school in Hannibal and on the road is that one of the biggest issues that you run into every single day is finding qualified people to do the work cost effectively and efficiently. Anybody, raise your hand if that's an issue. It's an issue for me too. And I struggle with it every single day. So what's the answer? The answer is train people how to do this stuff. You have a state preservation office that has what we call the Historic Preservation Fund. And they get a piece of that, and about 10 and as much as 15%, depending on the year, of that money they get from the National Park Service goes to certified local governments. That's if you have a decent ordinance and you work with the state and you become a CLG, certified local government. You can apply for grants to bring a number of different people in to train local contractors how to do this work, and property owners. So some property owners want to do the work, but they don't know how, and then being trained to do it helps them create some capability. And then the small contractors that I train all over the country and at the school, what's fascinating is they'll come in, some of them will be like basement remodelers or building decks, and there's a place for that, I get that. But they come to my school or they come to one of my workshops and they learn very quickly how to do a specific thing. It might be window restoration, it might be floor restoration, or historic masonry, or plaster work, or what have you. And they go back to their community and they start doing it, and they realize that they can make a better living and will never be laid off. All of these programs in the high schools around the country have a home building program. Not all, but most, where the kids go out and they learn how to build a house, and then they sell the house. Well, and then they have no job placement. So they go do this, the kids build a house, there's no job placement, they get out in the world, if they get a job, they're laid off half their life because new construction comes up and down, depending on the economy. Preservation-oriented rehab never stops. People live in existing houses, they aren't moving if the economy's bad, and they have to keep repairing things. So one way to do this is to take kids. So in Hannibal, when I got to Hannibal in 2008, I noticed all these kids, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, roaming the streets during school. I'm like, wow, that's bizarre. So I go out to the superintendent's office, I make an appointment with her, and I said, what's up with that? And now I'm from Hannibal. What is Hannibal known for? Mark Twain, right? So Jill, the superintendent, says to me, well, Bob, those are our hook fins. I'm like, oh, well, that's a vision. They come from the worst families in Hannibal. They're beaten, they're raped, they're in the juvie justice system, they have the most nightmare lives you've ever known, and they've all dropped out of school. I said, well, that's over. We're done with that. We're not going to do that anymore, girls and boys. I said, we're going to create a program. You're going to send those kids on a bus to my school in the morning at 8 o'clock. They're going to take historic preservation trades all morning. And we're going to send them back to the school in the afternoon. We're going to raise some money. I can raise some money for you. I raised $1 million with about 8 phone calls. And we've got hired special teachers because these kids learn differently. Half of the kids that came to me in 9th grade could not read. They were functional illiterates. And they'd been through the school system up to that point. So these kids start coming, and I insist half girls, half boys. Now, no offense, guys, but women are really good at the preservation trades. And they're coming in, millennial women, in droves into the artisan trades, which just makes my heart sing. I've been working at this a long time. And to see millennials, men and women, but a lot of women coming into this is really great because I don't know why, I'm not going to go into that, but they're really good at this. So here we have all these kids, and they are like different human beings. I'm told they're terrible. These are the finest human beings I have ever known. The finest human beings I have ever known. No one ever said, hey, good job. No one ever said, hey, you're okay. And no one ever said, that was not good, you didn't do that right. But if we talk about it and we figure out a better way to do it, maybe tomorrow you could do it better. And then tomorrow they do it better, and then you go, good job. And they're like, whoa, there's somebody in the world that thinks I'm okay? Wow, these kids really deserve it, because what happens to these kids if we don't engage them in some sort of trades like this is they end up working at a gas station or a McDonald's, or they are in jail, or they're dead. And it happens constantly. I have an apprentice right now named Dalton, and Dalton was in my high school program. And he graduated with his certificate in historic preservation trades. No one in his family had ever graduated from high school for 5 generations in Hannibal. No one. His mother died shooting heroin in front of him when he was in junior in high school. She would bring boyfriends home and have sex in front of all the kids and then beat him with a belt and never feed him. He's got bone issues because of malnutrition as a kid. And this kid works his heart out. He is a fine young man. I love him like a son. And what's really interesting about it is that he understands what we love, the part of all this that we love, the texture, the depth, the interest, the beautiful wood, the beautiful tile, the brick, the interesting roof lines, all the different things that make historic properties. Here is a 23-year-old kid now who just, he's like, to all of his friends think he's a complete whack job. He's like, you see that Craftsman bungalow over there? That's pretty good. It's, he's just astonishing. And we're the only parents he ever had, essentially. And that's the way it was. So we got to know each one of these kids. In 6 years, we graduated 160 kids that had dropped out of high school, and over about 60% of them were there long enough, 2 years, to get a certificate in the trades. 2 of the girls go down to St. Louis that came from really bad families, and they started a little preservation company called Two Broads. I love this. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, and I job placed them. I just happen to have relationships all over the country, and that's what preservation is all about. It's relationships, because you need to be able to. Every day I run into something that I don't have the answer for, and I can get online, I can get on the phone, and I can call 200 people that can give me that information, that can help me out. And so it's funny because I had another student named John, and John did really well in a preservation trades program that I ran in Danville, Illinois at the community college that I started and ran. And he was so good, he'd been doing remodeling work, he was almost helping me teach the class. And John was great, and everything dried up in Illinois, and he moved to Hannibal. And I always talk about how important relationships are in our business. And he's like, oh, that's a bunch of crap. That's a bunch of crap. It's only what you know, Bob. It's only what you know. Then I took him with me to a gig in Wichita, Kansas, where we took a baby camp. It's called the Fresh Air Baby Camp. And it was built during the Depression to help mothers, single mothers with their kids so they could go to work during the day and that kind of thing, and to restore all the windows in it. And we got done with it, and I introduced him. One of the students that came was from HistoriCorps. How many people have ever heard of HistoriCorps? A few. HistoriCorps is a relatively new not-for-profit based out of Denver that goes into the national parks, national forests, state parks, where the private market really can't get to because they don't want to interfere with the private market. I don't ever want to interfere with the private market because I'm a third-party consultant. I'm a neutral person. You hire me, I work for you. Don't take any money from any companies. I walked away from my PBS show because they wanted me to take free things like Norm and Steve. Why can't you take free stuff like the guys from this old house? And I said, well, because these people are my clients. These people are the people that I work for, and I need to be able to tell them if this tool, 10 of these types of tools are made, this one works the best, and I'm going to pay the same amount that you pay, and it's not because I'm getting anything from the company. And PBS said I wasn't a team player, so I walked, which is kind of interesting. Ace Hardware was involved. They wanted me to start promoting vinyl siding and vinyl windows on my preservation show sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So anyway, the point I want to make is that we need to train people. We need to train them, and you have the opportunity in your communities, if you become a CLG, to access some of that funding to help you bring in people to help train local people. That's how we're going to do it. We just have to do it, or send people to schools. There are several schools around the country. I happen to be the closest one to you, but there are other schools as well. Now, the other thing that Don Ripkema wanted to know is, what is the percentage of all those projects that you did that went to labor? It's an interesting question, right? 73.2% of all my projects go to labor. Now, that on the surface makes some people think that preservation is expensive. But you have to remember that new construction is about 40% labor and 60% materials. Preservation is just over 73% labor, and so very, very little in materials because we're saving original material. We're saving things that can be repaired. You take an old window, for example. I don't know anything about windows, but if you take an old window, for example, it can be repaired. New windows can't be repaired. It can't be repaired. So we want to take this old growth thing and we want to put it in the dump. It doesn't make any sense. Saving original material makes sense. There's a place for replacement windows or new construction, all kinds of different places, and there's some really top-line companies around that make good replacement windows. But in an old house, your only issue is air infiltration. To think that glass is an insulator of anything is to think that Richard Nixon was honest. Because glass is one of the worst thermal units of all the construction materials. You can double it up, you can triple it up, you can do whatever you want. But the difference is so insignificant between a single pane and a triple pane that it is really astonishing. So, we're going to take something that can be repaired, that's made out of a material that doesn't exist anymore. All the old growth wood is gone. It can be repaired. It can be repaired every 50 years, completely repaired. All the lead paint can be taken off of them today so that they're lead safe without any problems whatsoever. Weather stripped with $35 worth of weather stripping, and you can have less air infiltration than a replacement window. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but that is not conjecture. That's based on testing, science, and data. And there have been testing all over the place that show this to be true. All right. So, 112 million window sashes, according to Windows and Doors magazine, which is a trade journal. 112 million window sashes end up in our landfills in this country every single year. Now, But let's forget about the old growth windows and all that, and just look at the environmental nightmare of 112 million lead-coated window sashes being sent to our landfills every single year. It's over a $9 billion business, according to the window industry. Can you put up that pie chart for me? I don't have a lot of PowerPoint for this, but I have a couple I want to show you. 56 million of those windows that go to the dump every year are less than 20 years old. That's a shocking thing. And of those 56 million, a large percentage of them are the second and third replacement windows that have gone through. So the average replacement window is lasting 20 years, 15, 20, 25 at the most. If we look, let's go to the next one. If we look at this pie chart, this is from the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy. And I always ask people, I should have asked you before we put this up, what percentage does a creaky old leaky window with the putty falling out, the ropes broken, cheesy lumberyard storm, that's, you know, not even a good windbreak and breaks your fingernails off when you try to lift it up and down. You know what I'm talking about, right? 10%, that's it. That's how much of the energy footprint out of 100% that those windows. You have more problems with plumbing penetrations. You have more problems with doors. You have more problems with floors, ceilings, and ductwork and fireplaces than you do with windows. Windows is the smallest of them all, except for fans and electric outlets. So it's an insignificant issue to start with. It's just insignificant. And when you take an old window in a historic house or an old house, and you weather strip it and you get the ropes working, you re-putty them, you can drop that down to 3 to 4%. And that's the same, if not less than any replacement window. So we buy into the marketing. There are good companies that make these windows. There's no question about it. But when we're talking about old and historic windows, we need to stop it. We estimate that we've lost 80% of the windows in this country. 80%. And part of that comes from our inability to understand that the guy that invented the triple track aluminum storm was a moron, and there should be a prison for morons. Now, why is that? Well, because a double hung window was invented in the early 1500s in England as an air conditioning system. You drop the top sash 6 inches, you raise the lower sash 6 inches. It always works best when the top's the same number of inches down as the bottom is up, and all the heat and humidity goes out the top gap, and cool breezes come in through the bottom. I'm a Midwestern fat boy. I love central air conditioning. We have geothermal. I mean, it's fantastic, right? But we don't have to turn on our air conditioning until July. Everybody else is running it from April and May, and we don't have to because we use our windows the way they were designed. Most people don't even know the top sash operates in their house. I have these window boot camps, 3 days, where we teach people how to restore windows from beginning to end. And we get to the top sash, taking it out, and we pull it down, and they're like, oh my God, there's pulleys up there. But because of that aluminum storm, we forgot that operated because there's only a screen on the bottom, right? There's only a screen on the bottom, not the top. So what I want to say is that just because it's shiny and new doesn't mean it's good for old houses. Old houses are a unique thing. They are a treasure in our communities. How many people think that if you went into your downtown Main Street and just leveled it, that the community would be behind that? I mean, seriously, anybody? No. Because why? Why do you think they wouldn't? What do you think? No, that's a good question. Go ahead, Ben.
No, you go ahead.
No, okay, so why do you think?
So it defines the gestalt of the community.
Yes, so it defines the community. It's a landmark in the community's mind. It belongs to the community. Uh-oh, there's that property. That's my building. No, it belongs to the community. The community has a sense that it belongs. I'm in Southern Illinois right now, county courthouse, Population in the county of 2,600 people. The clock tower, 4 Seth Thomas clocks around the clock tower, is having some problems. It's leaking. So they hired me to specify how to restore it and to work and to help them find a contractor. And the job is going to cost $1 million. And they didn't even blink. And they didn't blink for 2 reasons. Number one, because everyone in that county feels that the county courthouse belongs to them. And it's a part of their heritage and it's a part of their identity. And the other one is, it's in southern Illinois and they have the largest indoor marijuana growing plant in the state. And the revenues have really been coming in, they told me, which is fascinating. Yeah, Quincy, Illinois is across the river from me. The first day that it was legal for recreational in Illinois, Quincy, Illinois, a conservative German town of 30,000 people, did $3.2 million in sales. That's astonishing. I'm not saying it's right. I wouldn't know anything about that. The bottom line is that these are iconic properties within our communities, and they would have been willing to do it. They'd saved up enough money over the years, they knew they had to do it. I think he was halfway kidding me and sort of not, but the fact is that they're going to do it because it belongs to that 2,500 people that live in the county. They love that thing. And our neighborhoods are not just about the houses, they're about people. And what's wonderful about the Midwest, what they call flyover country in the East Coast, and by the way, when I do book signings on the East Coast, I don't take checks because they always bounce. They never bounce in the Midwest. But there's actually, if you calculate how much preservation's going on in the center of the country, in flyover country where we live, there's more going on dollar-wise and actual work-wise in the center of the country than both coasts combined. They would tell you that's a bunch of garbage, but the statistics show that that's true. So it's very important that we understand that. So preservation is labor-intensive. What does that calculate out to? Jobs. Preservation creates almost double the number of jobs that new construction creates. When you have a Walmart come in and they extort a couple $1 million from the community to get you to come in, then they bring in outside labor and outside materials. You can do a side-by-side comparison about what stays in the community and what doesn't stay in the community. And you obviously, if you're doing a preservation, you're going to the local glass shop, you're going to the local masons, you're going to the local lumber yard, you're eating at the diner down the street every day. It's all about community. Preservation, when you embrace preservation in your community, what you're doing is you're embracing the people that live in your community. You're embracing the concept that our built environment matters. Now, what about energy efficiency? It's interesting. I got the flipper here. I'm not very electronically inclined. There's one thing I do want to show you real quick in regard to the window industry, and that's right here. So, in this magazine, the Window Industry Trade magazine, last month, it said, look, we know windows don't last more than 20 years now, so let's start marketing that way. It's time for you to get new windows. So here's one of the signs. Stop, you need to replace your windows if your windows are 15 years or older. Your windows are difficult to operate. When we get done restoring a window, you see this fellow back here with the window display? That's the system that we use today. It still tests out the best for air infiltration. It's one finger operation. One finger. None of this crap, like you have to go through. One finger. Your windows are drafty or have cloudy glass. Well, why are they saying cloudy glass? They're saying it because insulated glass has huge failures. So the seal between the panes of glass fails. IG Cardinal, the largest flat glass manufacturer in the country, back in the early 2000s, did accelerated testing on insulated glass. And they found that the seals fail in the first 3 to 6 years, regardless of what kind of seals you use. And then the industry started putting a desiccant in that hollow strip that separates the panes of glass. What's a desiccant? That's that little bag that comes in your pill bottle. And it's there to absorb moisture because they know that moisture is going to get into there because the seals are going to fail. So we see seal failure in the first 9, 8, 9, 10, 12 years. And if they're wood windows that are clad on the outside with aluminum, have you seen these windows? And they have a place in new construction, but they don't work very well in existing houses. The cladding, I can walk up to a clad window that's been there for 10 years and hit it with my elbow, and the cladding will fall off and the window sash is rotted halfway into its thickness. And when the seals fail, moisture can get down and rot the wood in the bottom rails. So, and all the window manufacturers have some high-tech products that will last somewhat longer. And I'm talking about average type stuff, the average vinyl window, that kind of thing. But I think this is very instructive about what we do every single day. And windows aren't the only thing. The other thing that we're losing in historic houses are wood floors. How is that possible? Because we're grinding them to death. We're using drum sanders to take 1/8 of an inch sometimes off of a wood floor. If you live in an old house and you want your floors to look new, here, will you stand up for a second? Then I'm going to put my arm around you and I'm going to say, you see that cornfield development where all those snout houses are? That's where you should go live. And then you've never watched Antiques Roadshow, right? What do they tell you on Antiques Roadshow? About the guy walks in with a Gustav Stickley sideboard, original, with a label on the back. And he stripped it and refinished it, and he's so proud of it. And what do the Keynote twins say to this guy? Anybody? Leave it alone. Well, you moron, if you hadn't done that, it'd be worth 15 grand, now it's worth $1,000. So, Antiques Roadshow, God bless them, they are the ones that started to get people to think that original finishes are something that have value. So my floors, I've never put a drum sander on a floor in my entire life on any project I've done. Now, on really rough warehouse type floors that are, getting all kinds of splintering and that kind of thing, I use what's called a U sander, the letter U. You can rent these, and they have 4 6-inch orbital sanding things, and it just sands the top surface, but it doesn't take away the patina. And if grandma is rocking and she's 85 years old and she's in front of the fireplace because she's cold all the time and she wants the heat and she's rocking and she makes 2 ruts in the floor, I don't want to grind that away. That's part of the character. When we bought our house in Hannibal, it came with lime green shag carpet, but they didn't give us the plastic rakes, so I was really upset. And we pull it up, and you can see the hand planing marks from 1859 that the slaves, our house was built by slaves. Every house before the end of the Civil War was built by slaves in Hannibal, enslaved peoples. And you can see the hand planing marks. You can see the drag marks where they drug a piano or something. And I found 4 deep dents about exactly where the legs of a pool table would be. And I thought, well, this is cool. There was a pool table. This is a pool room, billiards parlor, right? And then I do more research and I find out that from the University of Southern California that Mark Twain, when he came to Hannibal, stayed in our house and he wrote letters to his wife, Livy, which they gave us copies of, talking about playing billiards in my house. Oh my God, in Hannibal, if you had Mark Twain stay in your house, that's like gold, right? And so we had to get a pool table. So I couldn't afford an antique pool table, but I got a reproduction 1970s Brunswick with leather pockets and all that. And my wife's like, geez, Bob, that's just gonna sit there and collect dust. Nobody's ever gonna play pool. Every single guest is in there playing pool every night. I don't care if they haven't played pool since they were in 7th grade. They're playing pool because Mark Twain played pool there. Right? And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So, we all live, how many of you live in an old house? All right. How many of you wish you could live in an old house? Good, we'll work with you. You don't live in that old house because you love the vinyl siding. You don't live in that old house because you like all the metal cladding on your eave. You love that old house because of the beauty of it and the texture of it. It is a part of your actual soul when you live in one. It becomes a part of who you are. It says to the community, I care. It says to your kids, I want you to live around beauty. And just because you're in the central city doesn't mean you're a second-class citizen. You need to be able to have some controls so that the slumlord next door can't put the vinyl siding and rip out all of his original windows, which, according to Donovan Ripkema's studies here in the Midwest, show that that will devalue your house instantly if you've kept the character of your house. You have a right to have a neighborhood that does not affect the value of your property and take away your property rights. Historic preservation is something I've been involved in all my life. I'm going to leave you with a story I told in a breakout session, but I think it's an important story. I did not know what historic preservation was when I was 17 years old, but I found out pretty quick. My buddy Mark and I had the biggest paper outs for the Des Moines Register. I grew up in Des Moines. And we'd saved up 10 grand. That was a lot of money. 5 grand each for two kids with the two biggest paper outs in Des Moines. And this is before Johnny Gosch was kidnapped, so they used to let us have paper outs. And we're building sets at the local community theater because we were volunteering and we both were into, my dad had taught me how to do that kind of stuff. And a gay couple walks up to us that were heavily involved in the theater, and they said, we're going to San Francisco. Gay people are safer out there. And we're like, okay, whatever. See ya. They said, no. You guys are bragging about this 10 grand. You should buy our house. And we're like, man, we're in high school. We can't buy your house. We're in high school. And he's like, well, come out and look at it. So we followed him out there, and it was on the wrong side of town. I lived on the west side of Des Moines, and I lived in a predominantly Jewish community on the west side of Des Moines, 6 synagogues, and my graduating class in high school was 66% Reform Jews. It was an amazing neighborhood to grow up in. Classic old houses, arts and crafts and tutors and all that kind of thing. And my dad was, I was just thinking the whole time I'm driving over on the east side, oh, my dad would just have a conniption fit if he knew I was over on the workers' side of town, right? So we drove up, and it was across the street from Union Park. Union Park was a park that was dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt in support of unions. That was an amazing thing. Whether you believe in unions or not, Teddy Roosevelt had this epiphany at some point in his public career that unions were important. And so he dedicated this park. The house was built in around 1906 or so, I believe. And I drove up, and it blew my mind. It had a little cross-bucked, tuck-under garage door. It had a porch with casement windows that you could open up and look out over the park. It had a little balcony above that porch. It was stucco on the first floor and cedar shingle siding on the second. It had its original cedar shingle roof that was leaking like a sieve. We go inside, and there's all this weird woodwork with stripes in it and stuff. And the kitchen cabinets were obviously pine. My mom was also an antique dealer, and it had this big sink with ribbed sideboards on each side, and it was in perfect condition. And we go upstairs, and the little balcony's cool, and there's a hole in the ceiling, and we go up into the attic, and there's a whole bunch of wallpaper rolls over on the side. So we grab them all up, and we take them down to the living room, and we take the tissue paper off, and it's not wallpaper, it's the original blueprints. Now, I rarely ever find original blueprints in old houses. It's a real rare thing. And we unroll them, and a catalog falls out. And I pick up the catalog, and it's dog-eared on a page, and I open it up, and there's this house. And I closed it back up, and it said, Gustav Stickley's Craftsman Homes. And the prints were signed by Gustav Stickley. I had no idea who Gustav Stickley was, but I knew this was cool. And I said, well, we love it. Mark and I, we love it, but how do we do this? They said, we'll be the bank. We'll leave for San Francisco. We'll sell it to you for $16,000. This is 1973. And you give us $2,000. You'll have $8,000 left. You can rehab it over the winter and sell it before you graduate from high school, or you'll be good. We're like, done. And we closed the deal with them that afternoon and signed this land contract with them. No bank involved. And we go and we start to get bids. Now, I'm a good Iowa boy, so I got bids from Pella to replace all the windows. It was 1973, so to be really, really groovy, you had to have wide aluminum siding, like, the lapels on your leisure suit. And we were going to get a 3-tab shingled roof on it and the whole works. And we put all the bids down, and they were almost $30,000, and we were in shock. Because what are we going to do? We're screwed. We don't know what to do. So we go over and look at the windows. And we found a secret trap door in the side of the window jamb. Oh, look at there. There's weights in there. Okay. So we could buy rope. And then the putty was falling out. Well, I remember my dad had this red can of DAP on the counter. That's like glazing putty. Don't use DAP. DAP is crap. Anyway. You can't, if you paint DAP before 28 days, it will fail. If you don't paint it before 28 days, it will fail. We use linseed oil-based putties. But anyway, that's a whole different story. And then we pulled back the shag. Now, this had lime green shag carpet, and it did come with a plastic rake. And we pulled it back, and Mark and I went and got a 6-pack of beer. We shouldn't have, but, what the heck? We had one. And I spilled the beer on the floor. And we took a bunch of rags and wiped up the beer, and it took the finish off. And the floor had been re-shellacked so many times it was almost black. My grandmother would just put more shellac on the banister and not even clean it. And then by the time I was, in high school, you couldn't even see the wood anymore. And that's what this floor was. And all of a sudden, this stripy stuff, which I found out was white quarter-sawn oak, showed up. And I went, alcohol. So I went to the hardware store and we bought a bunch of denatured alcohol, and we stripped all the floors and all the woodwork that needed it with alcohol, got good fans in there, and that's the first time I did a passive floor restoration, and I've been doing it ever since. It costs less to do it, to strip the finishes off and put new finishes down than it does to sand them, and it takes less time. So it's, again, I'm a historic property developer. I like to make a profit. Some people have asked me, well, how many windows have you ever replaced in 163 projects? Not one, for 2 reasons. I want my buildings to be energy efficient, and if I replace the repairable, wonderful old windows with a new modern window that can't be repaired, I cannot make my buildings energy efficient. And number 2, I want to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with the word profit, but I'm talking 10, 12% profit. The reason the building industry, that the functional and economic life of houses being built in the burbs today is running, according to appraisers and architects that I've been surveying for the last 10 years, the average functional and economic life, that's when a house has to be torn down or gutted, of a house being built in the burbs today is 27.3 years. You ask the same question of the same architects and appraisers, what's the functional and economic life of a complete rehab of a 100-year house, and it's over 80 years and it can be done again. So what are we doing to ourselves? We have to retain what we have left. It's our responsibility to go out and preach this everywhere. Can I get an amen? Amen. All I want to leave you with is this. Preservation doesn't cost, it pays. It puts money back into your community. It keeps your cultural identity in your community. It actually is one of the greatest economic drivers for small towns in the world. Hannibal, Missouri is 18,000 people, and we do $70 million a year in tourism because we are one of the most historic towns in the world. And what's interesting is that Asia, Vietnam, China, Europe, droves of people come to Hannibal from those places because they still teach Twain in public schools. When I grew up in Des Moines, they read Tom Sawyer to us in first grade. In third grade, we had to read Huck Finn and discuss the racial implications of it. Now, how many of your grandkids or kids are being taught that today? Probably none. Now, Iowa's always been known for pretty good education, but so is Nebraska, because Nebraska is a great place. And some of you don't know this, but I have a connection to Nebraska. My dad's sister was the vice chancellor of the University of Nebraska, Virginia Trotter, and my dad's other sister, Betty Yapp, was the head of Lincoln General Hospital. So I spent a lot of time in Lincoln, Nebraska as a kid. And you have a great state, and you have a lot of great historic resources, and you have one of the best Midwestern state preservation offices that you can think of. You've got the wonderful not-for-profit here in Omaha. This is good stuff. Congratulate yourselves, because I think you rock. Thank you very much.